Hello lovelies. As a creator, I'm used to being asked certain questions like, who are you? How did you get in here? And is that chloroform I smell? But I also get asked a persistent question in relation to a lot of things. My work, my philosophical and non-religious beliefs and so on, and that's most commonly, who hurt you? Well, I can tell you exactly who hurt me. That's right, television. Television hurt me. The more observant amongst you will have noticed that I have a penchant for doing riffs, takes, satirical comedic versions and copycat intros from old children's television from the 70s and 80s. I was born in 1975, and in Britain, the 1970s lasted well into the 1980s because children's television was cheap and they liked doing reruns. So I was repeatedly traumatized by terrifying children's programs.
Captain, the halyards is hooked up on the half deck and the stern is stowed with the starboard.
Captain Pugwash is mostly remembered today for things that weren't true about it, that many of the characters' names were sexual double entendres, like Master Bates and Roger the Cabin Boy and Seaman Staines. None of that was actually true, the closest you got was Master Mate. But even so, it was disturbing. Here were these grotesquely obese pirates, and we're talking 2018 Texan obese. In the 1970s, when, you were eating fish fingers and Findus crispy pancakes that barely counted as food, here were these enormously fat pirates who never actually seemed to do any piracy, and who were so poorly animated that in the earlier series, it wasn't animated at all. It was a picture, and people were moving pieces of paper on sticks and so on to make the characters move. It was all rather strange.
There's a lot of noise coming from the school playground where Betty works. Rose doesn't mind noise, really. It's only Daisy's noise she can't take.
Pigeon Street was another horrifying place, inhabited solely by grotesquely obese and deformed people with triangles for arms and legs, and that made particularly effective and disturbing use of primitive electronic effects for the sounds of the pigeons and other bits and pieces.
Yes. Oh, I'm diabolically clever. Now, is everything ready? Yes. Then let the experiment begin.
While the drug references in the Magic Roundabout have been overblown in much the same way as the supposed sexual references in Captain Pugwash, and while a lot was lost in translation from the French, it is nonetheless true that a great deal of the fare that we were taking in certainly seems to have been influenced by the psychedelic drug culture of the immediately preceding period.
Hello, says Frank. Why are you standing here? We're waiting for an apple that Bod threw up in the air to come down again, says Aunt Flo. Can you see it? No, says Frank.
Bod, for example, seems to have taken place entirely within the confines of a K-hole. The few things that hold your attention in Bod, the characters who are each introduced by their own musical score, are all you really notice, and everything else drops away into this featureless green plain. In Jamie and his magic torch, his mother appears to be spiking his goodnight drink of milk with some hefty amounts of acid, because every night his dog begins to talk and they both disappear down a weird looking hole shone by his magic torch into a land of psychedelic wonderment.
Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway station, which was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear. They were waiting for their daughter Judy when Mr. Brown caught sight of him sitting on an old suitcase behind a pile of mailbags. As they drew near, he stood up and politely raised his hat.
I liked Paddington. There were some nice merchandise tie-ins, some particularly delicious biscuits, I seem to remember, and I had a money box where you'd put coins in the top and it would stack them up and tell you exactly how much you had of each kind, which was very nice. But I also remember it disturbing me, and it's only now looking back I can really understand why. Paddington Bear, the animation there, seems to be taking place from the perspective of a sociopath. Paddington, the sociopath, because he is the only three-dimensional character, and it's only people who are useful to him, like the Browns, that really appear in colour, but they're still two-dimensional, and everything else is just colourless and completely flat.
I'm a very friendly lion called Parsley.
No, you're a terrifying lion named Parsley. Ugh. So much stuff used stop-motion animation and crude stop-motion animation. That was kind of the CGI of the 70s and 80s when you wanted to make a series on the cheap, and it was horrifying. I think stop-motion animation just has that unnatural, terrifying aspect to it in the same way that ventriloquist dummies or clowns do.
Grandfather was in such a daydream playing the flumpet that he didn't see Pootle. Oh, he thought, Grandfather must use a lot of breath playing his flumpet the way he does. I'll ask him if he'll blow my balloon up for me.
Only in the 70s could you get a stop-motion animation about little furry bollocks called flumps onto national television. And thinking about it, that's another sign of the cheapness. Quite often in these shows, there would only be one person's voice, the narrator, who would then put on silly accents and modes of speaking for all the different characters, which was fine when it was Willie Rushton reading Winnie the Pooh on Jackanory, but not so much in these. It just adds to the weirdness there.
We will roast it, we will scrub it, we will wash it and rub it and thump it, we will soak it, we will soak it, we will boil it and out and slap it, we will roast it, we will scrub it, we will...
Stop! Stop at once! Stop!
You said a mouthful, Madeline. Bagpuss is remembered with love and affection by a great number of people, and I count myself amongst them. And the idea of your toys and things coming to life while you're asleep or while you're away is a charming one that we see revisited today in Toy Story. But then when you look at these things and how they come to life, how they move and they act in Bagpuss, then it's amazing we ever slept a wink in our lives.
That is a clanger. And that is another clanger. They seem to have a piece of rope.
My name is Hartley Hare, and today I'm going to talk to you about being naughty.
Thanks to the wonders of the internet, I can now traumatize myself as an adult with content from regional television that was not shown down here in the south. That monstrosity appears to have been shown in Scotland and in parts of the north as part of Pipkins. He seems to be the embodiment of one of the voices that a schizophrenic might hear, and is possibly the most horrifying thing I've ever seen on children's television.
New Flymo DXE, first ever hobble mower to cut and collect the grass. Light and easy DXE from the Flymo range. Quite simply, the most advanced lawn mowers in the world.
Even the advert breaks, which you only got on ITV, Channel 3, until the advent of Channel 4, a whole 4 channels, even they were no respite from the terrifying, constant onslaught of weird, trippy imagery. The entire 70s was like a bad trip gone horribly, horribly wrong.
Action Man! And his transport command. Tough, realistic models specially designed for Action Man.
If the adverts weren't making you doubt the veracity of the reality around you, they were preparing you to fight wars for an empire that had finally disappeared in the previous decade. Can you imagine today them trying to sell you war toys based on realism? I don't think so.
Come along, darling, walkies. Come along, Roger.
It may come as a nasty shock, but people need exercising just as much as dogs. If you just went for a few good walks, that'd be a start.
Surreality and horror were also used to disarm you when it came to public service announcements or various acts of do-gooding. Not just BDSM walkies either. I mean, you may think things are bad today with politicization in media, but it goes way back, and there are few examples as egregious as the example of Joey Deacon.
And it all started when one day, as a bit of a joke really, one of the nurses said, "You know what, Joey, you ought to write a book about your life." And that's exactly what Joey did. With the help of Ernie and Tom and Michael, their two great friends who were also in their ward. First of all, Ernie would translate Joey's grunts.
Greatly concerned about how cruel children were being to each other and that they were using disabilities as a means to insult each other. "Oi, you spastic," and so on, some well-meaning people decided to take the opportunity of this book to wheel Joey Deacon, a 60-plus-year-old man suffering from severe cerebral palsy, onto children's television on Blue Peter. Oh yeah, we stopped calling people spastics, and we started calling them Joeys.
Very late one evening, when even the birds had stopped squeaking, Rhubarb was tip-toeing about the garden, muttering mutters to himself.
What's that noodle-brained dog up to at this unearthly hour?
Yawned Custard.
Rhubarb and Custard's animation was so cheap and so shaky, it looked like it could have been drawn by Joey Deacon. But most of these things that we've seen so far aren't even trying to scare us. When it came to public service announcements, things got really terrifying. Purposefully terrifying.
For some of you, the face you start out with in the morning won't be the same face you end up with by the evening. Why let it happen? Clunk, click, it's so simple. Clunk the car door, click the seatbelt, even if you are just going round the corner, clunk, click every trip.
Yes, Mr. Sowell, I'll wear my seatbelt. Just please don't touch me again.
Charlie says, always tell your mummy before you go off somewhere so she knows who you are with.
Even today, I am still uncovering horrors from this period of our history, some of them foreign. So I'm going to leave you now with this particularly traumatizing public service announcement from Finland about the dangers of thin ice. Zang and sweet dreams. Grim gave a big yawn and settled down to sleep. And of course, when Grim goes to sleep, all of his friends go to sleep too. The people on the internet were just text on a screen, the collectibles were just cheap plastic tat, and the books were just elaborate sandwiches made of wood and paper. Even Grim himself, once he was asleep, was just an old saggy goth twat, baggy and a bit loose at the seams, and nobody loved him.
Goodies
Goody, goody, yum,